The Pacific Islands are on the front line of the climate emergency. As the world met for the COP26 summit, Meghan Mohan travelled there to meet women leading the fight against the climate crisis, including the region's only current serving female Prime Minister, the Eco Prime Minister. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Prices rise at their fastest rate for 30 years, driven by a sharp increase in petrol and diesel costs. Food prices are also up. The hospitality sector is hit hard.
I've never known nothing like this, whether it's, the prices of food coming into the country, fuel prices, everything's sort of against you at the minute, VAT going back to 20%.
We'll have more on today's record inflation, also this lunchtime. The Prime Minister is mortified, says the Transport Secretary, after Boris Johnson and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak were fined for breaking COVID rules. In Ukraine, fighting continues as 120,000 residents remain trapped in the port city of Mariupol. A whole life sentence is handed down to the Islamic State group sympathiser who murdered the MP Sir David Amess. China admits it is struggling to feed millions of people who are living under strict COVID lockdown in Shanghai.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, the manager of Northern Ireland Women, Kenny Shields, is criticised after saying women don't take well to conceding because they're more emotional than men.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The soaring cost of fuel and food has pushed inflation to a 30-year high. It stood at 7% in the year to March, up from 6.2% the month before. Prices are going up faster than wages, and there's pressure on the government to do more to help people who are struggling. And the cost of living is expected to rise even further, because these figures don't include the recent increases in gas and electricity bills for millions of people. Here's our economics correspondent, Andy Verity.
Table 14, please.
In this restaurant kitchen in Eccles in Greater Manchester, global price pressures are feeding through to your pizza. Two of the world's biggest producers of vegetable oil are Russia and Ukraine, and a drum of it has more than doubled from £14 to £35. The price of tomatoes from Spain has more than doubled, partly due to Brexit. And that's before you even talk about the cost of the energy needed to cook the pizza and keep customers warm, up due to the war and a surge in demand for fuel as the global economy recovers from the pandemic.
I've never known nothing like this, whether it's, the prices of food coming into the country, fuel prices, everything's sort of against you at the minute, VAT going back to 20%. There is sort of like, it's stacking up. I think a lot of people will struggle.
Businesses like this one are already facing inflation at its highest for 30 years. And this month, they've got a quadruple whammy. Higher interest rates, higher wages, higher national insurance, and soaring energy bills. With that kind of cost pressure, they've got no choice but to pass it on to their customers. This restaurant's likely to be forced to add somewhere between 50p and £1 to the pizza price to avoid making losses. But that's nothing compared to other costs.
Increased petrol is something we've noticed.
Yeah, the petrol is, I take these everywhere and it goes drastically, like my petrol, so.
Stuff that we didn't used to worry about or even think about, but going around making sure lights are turned off when you're not in the room.
Oh, lovely, thank you.
Some locals have launched a charity to help distribute food to locals who can't afford to eat out or even to shop for food.
Historically, we found that people didn't want to come to the charity because of the stigma attached. And now we're just finding that, forget the stigma, they need the help. Having to swallow pride and accept the help that's on offer.
When you break the rising cost of living down, the prices of services rose by 4%, not half as fast as the price of goods, up 9.4%. That underlines a key point. The upward pressure on prices is global. In Europe this month, they're expecting inflation of 7.5%. In the US, inflation's reached a 40-year high of 8.5%, and the official Russian inflation figure is 12.5%, though the US reckons it's far worse than they're owning up to.
The April inflation number is likely to be even higher. It could well be around 9% when we get the April inflation report next month. So that it points to a further squeeze on living standards, and it's not going away anytime soon.
On the old-fashioned measure of the cost of living, the Retail Prices Index, it's already at 9%, its highest level since 1991. Opposition parties are now saying the government must do more than it has to help millions cope with the tightest squeeze on living standards in more than 40 years.
And Andy is with me. I mean, the Bank of England's likely to keep putting interest rates up. Will that help? Can that help?
Well, Jane, the theory behind raising interest rates is you've got too much demand in the economy, there's too much money being spent, and you're trying to slow things down by raising the cost of borrowing so that, for example, people with variable rate mortgages don't have as much money to spend. But that job's already being done by energy bills, because they're already taking money that would have been spent on other things away, and it's getting spent on energy, so there's less money to be spent on buying things in shops, for example. And that will slow the economy down in itself. And actually, when you look at economic growth now, it's just 0.1%. So it's not that our domestic economy going like the clappers is causing inflation. Far from it. We've got something akin to 1970s stagflation here, where the economy's stagnant and we've got inflation at the same time. And really, there's not a huge amount the Bank of England can do to affect that situation with interest rate rises. Perhaps the government could do something, and some people are now saying that Rishi Sunak missed an opportunity at the last budget, and he should have, at the spring statement, and he should have done more to help ordinary families, because millions are now struggling with the tightest squeeze on living standards we've had since the mid-70s.
Andy, thank you for now. Andy Verity. Well, students and graduates in England face a roller coaster of interest rates on their student loans over the next couple of years. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the interest will rise to 12% in September. It will then dip in March 2023 when a cap on the interest will kick in. For students starting degree courses from next year, the rate will be fixed at a lower level. The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has said the Prime Minister is completely mortified at being fined for breaking COVID lockdown laws, adding Boris Johnson didn't knowingly break the law, but he had done wrong and had accepted responsibility. So far, only one Conservative MP has publicly said again that Boris Johnson should resign. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, who also received a fixed penalty notice, have all apologised. Helen Catt reports from Westminster.
The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have apologised after the police found they broke the law. They've accepted fines for being at an event to mark Mr Johnson's birthday held in the Cabinet Room in June 2020. Mr Johnson said he was only there for 9 minutes, but that people had the right to expect better. Mr Sunak said that he deeply regretted the anger and frustration caused. But neither the Chancellor nor the Prime Minister think it's something they need to resign over.
He's paid the fine. It's an event of 2 years ago. I feel the same anger as everybody else that these events could take place, not least because I couldn't see my own dad, who I didn't know whether we'd see again, ever. So I completely get it. I also know that it wasn't done out of malice or with intent. It was a mistake, an error. And I judge somebody overall for the way that they perform.
Most of the Cabinet have now said they support Mr Johnson and Mr Sunak staying in their jobs. So any real immediate risk to the Prime Minister would come from Conservative MPs choosing to call a vote of no confidence. Now, so far, several dozen of them have come out to back Mr Johnson. Just one has publicly said he should go.
In all conscience, I don't think a Prime Minister can survive or should survive breaking the rules he put in place, and he was on the TV every few nights reminding us all that we should observe. We have to have higher standards than that of people at the top. he's been fine. I don't think his position is tenable in my view.
The Liberal Democrats and the SNP say Mr Johnson should resign out of decency and honour. Labour says it's not possible for him and Mr Sunak to just get on with the job.
They're spending more time justifying themselves and the parties they've been going to rather than focusing on the issues that we need them to address as a country. So the idea that we can't change leadership now because of the war in Ukraine or because of the economic crisis, I think it's actually the other way round, that actually we need fresh leadership and we need leaders who can concentrate on the job in hand.
The Met Police haven't finished their investigation into parties in Downing Street, so it's possible there will be more fines. The full detailed report by the civil servant Sue Gray is also still to be published. For now, many Tory MPs are publicly backing the idea that the war in Ukraine means it isn't the time to change leader. The question is if that continues to hold. Helen Catt, BBC News, Westminster.
And our political correspondent Nick Eardley has the latest at Downing Street. Where does this all go now, Nick?
Well, Jane, I think you'll continue to hear opposition parties say the Prime Minister needs to resign, but there doesn't seem to be a great appetite within the Conservative Party right now for a change of leader. Certainly from the Conservative MPs I've been speaking to over the past day or so, there is a reluctance to go into a leadership election at the moment, in part because of the war in Ukraine, in part because it's not clear who the Prime Minister's successor would be. Remember that many of the people who thought that Boris Johnson may be on the way out hoped that Rishi Sunak, who lives next door, would be his replacement. The fact that he's had a fine and a pretty torrid couple of weeks because of his own family tax affairs means that looks increasingly unlikely. So I don't think you're going to see the Prime Minister removed imminently, but I don't think the story is going away either. And there are a few things that Boris Johnson will still be really nervous about. One is the fact that there could be more fines to come. We know that the Met Police investigation is continuing. The other is the fact that we don't know exactly when this will all conclude in Parliament. I suspect next week there will be accusations that the Prime Minister misled MPs, something he will have to answer at Prime Minister's questions. And finally, Sue Gray, remember her, the civil servant looking into all of this? She's got another report that she plans to publish as soon as the Met has finished its investigation. Sources close to that process have told me they think it will be detailed and it will be damaging. So this story has gone on and on and on for several weeks now. I don't think it's done yet.
Nick, thank you. Nick Eardley in Downing Street. Now, for the latest on the situation in Ukraine, we'll cross to my colleague Clive Myrie, who, as ever, is in the capital, Kyiv. Clive.
Yes, good afternoon, Jane. President Biden says the evidence appears to suggest that Russia is committing genocide here in the country. He warns it's becoming clearer and clearer that Vladimir Putin wants to wipe out the idea of even being Ukrainian. Now, his comments come as there are growing signs Russia could be on the brink of fully capturing the southern port city of Mariupol, which has suffered a devastating 6-week assault. The Defense Ministry in Moscow says more than 1,000 Ukrainian Marines have surrendered in the area there, although a top Ukrainian official says some have joined another battalion. Well, as our correspondent Dan Johnson reports from the western city of Lviv now, Ukrainian troops in Mariupol have said in recent days that they're running out of ammunition.
The ruins of Mariupol are symbolic of Russia's devastating bombardment. And now, the city's last defences may finally be about to crumble. Russian TV says these are Ukrainian Marines surrendering. The pictures aren't verified, and Ukraine's denied Russian claims 1,000 soldiers have given themselves up. Russian forces are gaining more ground. These pictures were filmed with their troops at the theatre where so many lives were lost. The mayor says it isn't even safe to count the bodies anymore. He estimates 21,000 residents have died.
From the 9th of March, Russian military planes were targeting our city. And since then, they have been doing this. You can see that 1,000 people have been killed. 21,000 residents have died. 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 21,000
Kharkiv's also been under bombardment, and Ukrainian officials say evacuation routes aren't safe enough to get residents out today.
Mr. President, have you seen enough evidence?
The US president's now clearly stated how seriously he views the Russian invasion.
I called it genocide because it's become clearer and clearer that Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of even being able to be a Ukrainian. And the evidence is mounting. It's different than it was last week. The more evidence is coming out of literally the horrible things that the Russians have done in Ukraine. And we're going to only learn more and more about the devastation.
There's more heavy Russian military equipment coming over the border into eastern Ukraine, along with extra troops. Fresh attacks are expected. And these British volunteers have driven from the UK over the border from Poland to deliver aid and help the resistance. Simon's been in touch with a friend in Kharkiv.
I said, what's going on? And she goes, you don't want to know. She goes, it's awful. We've been bombed all night. And she sent me some videos and I was just like, I'm in. I said, I'll quit my job. I'm in. I want to do something to help you, help your friends, help your family and help Ukraine.
Cars have been donated to Ukrainian charities, but also military units.
The last trip out here, the vehicle I drove out the next morning, that vehicle, we had a photograph of it on the front line, being used literally within 12 hours of our arrival for what they wanted it for.
After our victory.
And Ukrainians are certainly thankful.
We are waiting for all of you and live here. Please, come here to live. We will feed you after our victory. Come here, please.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Victory party here.
But before any victory parties, it looks like there'll be more fighting.
So let's go.
The siege of Mariupol has been grim and deadly. It's been prolonged and destructive. And if Russia does take that city, that's a strategic victory for the Russians. It is a symbolic defeat for Ukrainian resistance. Who knows what it means for the estimated 100,000 residents who remain in that city. The people of Mariupol have suffered longer than anyone in this conflict. US President Joe Biden's reference to genocide is significant. It will be welcomed by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, but his question will be, what difference does it make in terms of the response now from the USA, from NATO, or indeed from other nations?
Indeed, that will be the response from the Ukrainian side, no question. Thanks very much indeed, Dan. Dan Johnson there reporting for us on the very latest situation there concerning Mariupol. Well, let's get the view from Moscow now. Jenny Hill is there. Jenny, hi there. Has there been any response to President Biden's comments on genocide?
Not yet, but we would expect the Kremlin, of course, to reject the accusations. It has repeatedly said it doesn't target civilians, and it continues to insist that it has not committed war crimes in places like Bucha, saying that the Ukrainians where Western allies have staged evidence of atrocities. Their standard Kremlin response: deny everything, point the finger of blame back at the accuser. Genocide as a word actually is used a lot by the Kremlin and state media here, because one of the baseless pretexts Vladimir Putin gives for his invasion is that he's having to protect the Russian-speaking populations of eastern Ukraine against genocide perpetrated against them by the Ukrainians. Completely baseless. In terms of President Biden's comments, they will be like water off a duck's back for Vladimir Putin. But what he does do with condemnations and sanctions, for that matter, is to take them, reframe them, and tell Russians that they are an example of Western aggression against his country. This is Vladimir Putin's Russia, in which Ukraine and the West are the aggressors and Russia is the real victim.
Indeed. Jenny, thank you. Jenny Hill there with the very latest from Moscow. Our correspondent Anna Foster is in the suburb of Borodianka, which is a few miles northwest of our position here. Anna, it's places like Borodianka and Bucha, of course, where you were yesterday, where many civilians have died, that's helped give rise to President Biden's genocide comments.
That's right, Clive. And in fact, President Zelensky has talked about having international backing on that. And just in the last half hour or so, we had a surprise visit here in Borodianka by the presidents who have been visiting him today in Kyiv, the presidents of Poland, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. And they came to see this. This is an apartment building. It is, as you can say, completely devastated. And what is happening at the moment is an operation to bring down the remains of this residential building and to find and recover the bodies that officials tell me are in the basement, the bodies of people who were hiding when apartment blocks like this were shelled. Now, obviously, genocide is a particularly complicated thing to prove, but when you see civilian buildings like this targeted, that will all add to that presumably upcoming criminal case that will happen at some point.
Sure thing. Anna, thank you. Anna Foster there in Borodianka, one of the suburbs just north of Kyiv. Well, that's it from me and the team here in the capital. Now back to you, Jane, in the studio in London.
Clive, many thanks to you and the team there in Ukraine. The time edging up to 1:20 our top story this lunchtime. The cost of living is at a 30-year high because of rising food and fuel prices. Still to come on the programme, Thunderbirds are go, accompanied by a live orchestra for a different kind of trip down memory lane.
Coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, we'll have the latest from the Monte Carlo Masters tennis, where British #1 Cameron Norrie is bidding to reach the last 16 against Albert Ramos Vinolas.
25 million people in Shanghai are in the second week of a strict lockdown after a surge in Omicron cases. People in the city aren't allowed to leave their homes, and most have to order in food and water and wait for government deliveries. And now officials have admitted that they're struggling to feed everyone. The BBC has seen inside government quarantine facilities where tens of thousands of people are being forcibly housed as China tries to maintain its zero COVID strategy. Well, our Shanghai correspondent Robin Brandt is himself in lockdown. He sent us this report.
More than 2 years after COVID first emerged here, China is still trying to keep it out. And this is how it's doing it. Tens of thousands of people forced into government-run quarantine. In one of China's most advanced cities, the conditions for some are awful.
The moment I really broke down was when I entered the cabin hospital.
We spoke to this 26-year-old. She tested positive a few days ago. In China, symptoms or no symptoms, you are forced to quarantine.
We were first assigned to the shared area. The condition was terrible. My roommate and I found 2 camp beds. There were only 1 restroom and 1 wash basin on each floor. Many sleep next to each other. I was terrified. I broke down and cried.
Forced quarantine is one of 2 often brutal measures that China is using to try to beat COVID. The other is citywide lockdowns. I'm 2 weeks into the one here, along with the other 25 million people that live in Shanghai. Now, for many, that means you can't step out of your gate. For some, it means you can't even go beyond your front door. And also daily worries about food. For some, even about water. For some, the plight is now desperate. A battle to place an order on your phone or a fight with the authorities, all just to get food in. Seeing video of Communist Party officials berated like this is rare here, but the party is digging in. Everyone's being repeatedly tested, but this has become less about science. It's now a battle between a resurgent virus and Communist Party credibility. Every province in this country has been told to prepare facilities like this as fears of a nationwide wave spread. Old, young, up until a few days ago, babies, all were quarantined on their own. In China, it's the price they pay, the sacrifice they make. The official figures suggest the confirmed cases may have started to fall yesterday, but tipped up again today. Those figures also claim there hasn't been a single COVID death this time round, not one. No one has officially died here from COVID, and zero COVID remains the goal. China is still determined to prove it can beat nature. Robin Brandt, BBC News, lockdown in Shanghai.
A judge at the Old Bailey has sentenced Ali Harbi Ali to a whole life prison term for murdering the Conservative MP Sir David Amess. Describing it as a murder that struck at the heart of democracy, Judge Nigel Sweeney said the 26-year-old Islamic State group sympathiser had shown no remorse. Outside the court, a police officer read a statement on behalf of Lady Amess and Sir David's family.
There is no elation in our family today following this sentencing. Our amazing husband and father has been taken from us in an appalling and violent manner. Nothing will ever compensate for that. We will wake each day and immediately feel our loss. We will struggle through each day for the rest of our lives. Our last thought before sleep will be of David.
And our home and legal correspondent Dominic Casciani is at the court. Dominic.
Yes, Jane, life with no possibility of parole for Ali Harbi Ali, who sat rather impassively through most of this morning's hearing, smiling occasionally to himself and certainly when he was taken down to the cells. But the reason why the judge, Mr. Justice Sweeney, went for that exceptionally high, the highest possible sentence he could give out, was because the crime crossed the legal bar for the test for this particular sentence. It had been a crime of national significance, a terrorist killing somebody as part of while they were carrying out their public duties for an act of effectively an ideological cause for the Islamic State group, and all these factors together made him go for this whole life order. Now, we heard there from Assistant Commissioner Matt Dukes speaking for the family, but we also heard in court a statement from Julie Cushion, one of the parliamentary assistants to Sir David. She is still also living with the horror of that moment. She said she's suffering flashbacks to the day, an example of actually how wide the impact has been. But I think possibly the last words of today should go to Sir David's family, and one of the other things that Matt Dukes and the Metropolitan Police said. He said, closing his statement, "It breaks our heart to know that our husband and father would have greeted the murderer with a smile of friendship. From now, he's in a cell for the rest of his life."
Dominic Casciani, thank you. The government says it's reached a deal with dozens of developers for repairs to be carried out on medium and high-rise buildings which have dangerous cladding. It comes nearly 5 years after the Grenfell Tower fire in London, in which 72 people died. Our correspondent James Reynolds is with me. So there's a lot of firms signed up for this, James, but not all.
35 of 53 major firms have signed up, leaving 18 who haven't signed up. And the ones that signed up, the chairman of the Homeowners Federation told me this morning he expects more to follow, have essentially agreed this. They will pay to fix their own buildings, that is, buildings they put up in the last 30 years. They'll also agree to pay into a fund to fix so-called orphan buildings. That's buildings where the original developer isn't known or can't be traced or can't be forced to pay. The Homeowners Federation is not particularly happy about having to pay for other people's buildings. And the government has warned that the 18 firms who haven't signed on should sign on or face consequences that could be a removal of planning permission. But standing back and looking at the overall principle of this, there's something really important to say. Developers will pay for the cost to fix cladding, not leaseholders. You might know in the last few years, leaseholders have been incredibly worried about the cost that might fall to them. Those costs are falling to developers, so leaseholders this morning have broadly welcomed the agreement. One campaigning organisation said on social media that it was a welcome step in the right direction, but it needed to be monitored building by building, and some costs, high insurance premiums and patrols to make sure fires don't break out, will not be clawed back.
James Reynolds, thank you. Now, Sylvia and Gerry Anderson were a powerhouse couple in British television in the 1960s and 70s, particularly remembered for creating Thunderbirds. But there was also Stingray, Captain Scarlet and Space 1999. Well, now for the first time, all the theme tunes to their shows are going to be performed live by an orchestra at a concert in Birmingham. Phil Mackey has the story.
Stand by for action.
Remember this?
We are about to launch Stingray.
If you do, I bet you're about to start singing along. The classic shows were scored by Barry Gray and created by Gerry Anderson, seen here with two of his most famous characters.
Parker's been having a little bit to drink recently, so he's...
Gerry's son is Jamie Anderson, and he's brought some of his late father's models to Symphony Hall ahead of the concert.
Stingray's one of mine. Just the thought that in a few days' time, this place is going to be filled with over 1,000 fans of Anderson Productions, and they're just going to relive, 6 decades of Anderson themes all in one night. I mean, I'm equally nervous and excited, I think.
The orchestra won't be able to rehearse together until Saturday, so they're learning their parts alone. Richard Harvey composed this theme to the 80s show Terrorhawks, and in his studio in South London is preparing for the concert which he'll conduct.
Oh, I think the music was absolutely pivotal. I mean, he was basically giving the world a puppet show, but Barry Gray's music turned it into a big screen thing. If it had been puppet show scale music, the whole thing would have failed. The music was such an integral part of it.
He's not wrong. The classic themes composed by Barry Gray in the 60s are unforgettable.
I think it's going to be a very special thing, personally and rather selfishly, to hear all that stuff, because obviously I'm a very proud son, knowing all that stuff was achieved by one man, and that one man was my dad. To have it all performed on one night and all these people coming to enjoy it will make it very special indeed.
What are you particularly looking forward to, and what's it been like coming back to it?
Oh, just looking through the scores, hearing it all again, prepping for the show has just brought it all back. It's just been fantastic. And when the baton comes down on the Thunderbirds march, every little hair on the back of my neck will be standing up. It just carries the best memories for me.
So FAB, Spectrum is green, and stand by for action. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Birmingham.
Stand by for the weather. Here's Thomas Schaffernacker. Hello.
Hello. And talking of thunder, there is just a chance of some thunderstorms today. We have showers brewing, and in fact, risk of showers is with us for the next few days. But I think the broad message is it's actually going to be turning quite a bit warmer. By Good Friday, temperatures are expected to reach 22 degrees in the southeast. If we get that, that will be so far the warmest spell of weather we will have had this year. We've got up to about 21 or so in March. So this is the satellite picture. Mixed clouds, I think, across the UK, layers of cloud. The showers are mostly breaking out this afternoon across the southern half of England and Wales, but also in the northeast of Scotland, a little bit of light rain here and there, and it is still cold and cloudy. So what comes our way this evening and overnight? Well, initially it'll be clear across many areas, but towards the end of the night, the thinking is that around the coasts of Wales, Cornwall, Devon, central southern England, possibly the Midlands too, it will cloud over. It'll be very murky in places, drizzle around coasts, but with all of this, the temperatures never really dip away too far, 5, 6, 7 degrees, those sorts of values. So the weather map for Thursday, high pressure keeping things relatively settled across the bulk of the country, but in the northwest, a different story here. A weather front is brushing Northern Ireland and the Western Isles of Scotland, so cloud and some on and off rain here. The rest of the UK, I think it's going to be a bright day with sunny spells, a lower chance, I think, of catching a shower tomorrow. There might be the odd one, maybe East Anglia in the southeast, but on the whole, it's a dry day. Temperatures continue to rise. Here's a look at Good Friday. Again, just sort of nuisance cloud out towards the west here, maybe some spits and spots, maybe some showers, but on the whole, it's not looking bad at all. And I suspect on Friday, temperatures will already nudge up to about 20 or so in the southeast, mid-teens easily in the lowlands of Scotland. And then Saturday, Sunday and into Monday, I know there's a lot going on here. You can see weather fronts moving across the UK. It will turn more unsettled, but I don't think the wind and the rain will reach us until Sunday night into Monday. So at the moment, Monday is looking a little mixed as far as Easter's concerned. But the weekend itself, so Saturday and Sunday, warm, mainly dry, and there'll probably be some foggy, murky mornings. So, on the whole, if I were to summarise the weather this Easter, yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah. Looks good. Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas Schaffernacker. And that is it from the news at 1. Now on BBC One, we'll join the BBC's news teams wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.